Hi everyone, my name is Jesse Makanovich and this is my applied assignment for SPE 223. My project focuses on inclusive education and physical accessibility in schools. Throughout this presentation, I explore how the physical environment impacts inclusion, equity, and student experience, and how my interview and research helped shape my understanding. In this presentation, I'll start with my pre-work and the foundations I brought into the assignment. Then I'll walk my way through the research I conducted, the new learning that emerged from my interview and the course materials, and finally, my continued inquiry, the new questions I'm still thinking about. I'll end with a couple of questions from my peers as well at the end. My pre-work centered around exploring inclusive education through the lens of accessibility and school environments. For my topic, I focused on education and specifically the physical accessibility of school environments. I chose this because in my own teaching experience, I've seen how things like stairs, narrow hallways, heavy doors, and sensory overload can affect students. These barriers influence their comfort, independence, and participation. The aspect of inclusion I wanted to explore specifically was accessibility, not only for the physical layout of a school, but also how classroom structure, environmental supports, and design choices shape a student's ability to navigate, engage, and feel like they belong. For me, inclusion isn't only instructional, it's about creating spaces where students can learn without unnecessary barriers. To deepen my understanding, I interviewed Sayada Makanovich, who teaches both primary and secondary levels and has nearly a decade of experience. I chose her because she works daily with diverse learners and constantly encounters real-world inclusion and accessibility challenges. She has experience supporting students with mobility, sensory, behavioral, and academic needs, and she's familiar with inclusive strategies and classroom-based accommodations. Her classroom insight helped me understand inclusion from a practical, teacher-centered perspective. Um, I connected my learning to two course ratings. The first was Race, Identity, Stereotyping, and Voluntary Oppression by Alavi. This helped me analyze how stereotypes and assumptions influence teacher expectations and interactions in inclusive settings. The second was Benefits and Barriers to Personal-Centered Planning by Hughes. This reading helped me understand individualized supports and person-centered approaches, um, and allowed me to connect Sayada's interview responses to larger structural issues surrounding inclusion. I also use two outside research sources. The first was Disability Studies and Inclusive Education by Connor, Gable, Gallagher, and Morton. This provided a disability studies and education framework that helped me analyze my interview findings from a structural standpoint. The second was Sukar and Dempsey's Global Review of Inclusion, Education Policy, and Teacher Preparation. This source offered international examples of inclusion and helped me compare our school's context to global standards. Um, this next section includes my supporting evidence. Um, this slide shows the screenshot of my interview scheduling from November 16th, which confirms the setup of my interview for this project. Now moving on to my new learning, the insights I gained from both the interview and my research. One of the biggest things I learned is that inclusion depends on much more than classroom instruction. School environments, the layout, the noise level, the accessibility, all deeply shape student participation. Teachers often want to support students better, but they face limitations in staffing, training, and environmental supports. Even small design issues like heavy doors, narrow hallways, sensory overload can have a big impact on students' comfort and independence. Because of this, inclusion requires a systems level planning, not just individual teacher effort. Um, so when I connected this back to the course, Alavi helped me understand how assumptions of stereotypes affect expectations. Hughes reinforced the importance of individualized, person-centered supports. Critical disability theory helped me see how structures, not individuals, create barriers. All of this ties into SPE 223's central themes, access, equity, and disability as a dimension of diversity. Um, Next, I focused on equity. Um, I I learned that equity is about removing barriers that limit access, not treating every student the same. Physical design, staffing, and routines can unintentionally create unequal opportunities for participation and independence. Teachers often compensate for systems gaps, but sustainable equity requires structural change. This connects strongly to the course's focus on equity versus the idea of inequities and the idea that inequities often come from systems, not individuals. It also aligned with our discussion surrounding cultural and family diversity and how context shapes a student's experience. Um, I also learned a lot about access. Access is not only about entering a building, it includes movement, navigation, sensory comfort, and independence. Small design issues like those heavy doors, narrow hallways, stairs, or noise can significantly limit a student's ability to participate. Access must be proactive and not reactive. School systems need to be designed with all learners in mind. Um, this reinforced the social model of disability, which says that environments create barriers, not students. And again, this aligned with critical disability theory and SPE 223's emphasis on access as a foundation of inclusion. The last section uh, focuses on continued inquiry, the new questions that came out of this project. So, one major question I now have is how can older or non-accessible school buildings realistically adopt UD principles? This came up because many accessibility barriers start with the building itself. To learn more, I want to explore case studies of schools that retrofitted accessibility features. I also want to look at UDL guidelines for physical spaces, explore policies and funding options, and consult with specialists like occupational therapists or even inclusive design experts. So, and finally, I have two questions for my peers. First, have you ever seen a student's independence affected by the design of a school building or classroom? And if so, what happened? And second, what supports or changes would help teachers better address physical accessibility in the classrooms? Thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts and your responses.